Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Professor Simon Critchley?
No.
Oh dear, Simon, it sounds like you, though. It sounds like the voice of a professor.
Yes, me. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Simon. Thank you so much, Simon, for taking my call today for the Quarantine Tapes. I should say to our listeners that Simon Critchley is a professor of philosophy at the New School in New York. And what does a professor of philosophy do during these quarantine times? In other words, what are you doing during a day?
The really good news is that my Japanese restaurant on the corner, Hibino, on the corner of Henry Street and Pacific, shout out for Hibino, is still doing takeout. So that's the highlight of the day. And then kind of fumbling around, basically, giving myself the illusion that I'm busy and doing something useful, and the time passes or doesn't pass, and then get back on a kind of a hamster wheel of illusion. That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm virtually doing remote teaching and things like that.
So tell me about, so you're teaching a class on Heidegger, and you mentioned being towards death, and it's so much on message. How so? And I know you've been thinking also a lot about grief.
And fear and anxiety and things like that. I mean, I don't mind who knows it now, but I'm an existential phenomenologist, and might be the last one in existence. I'm an existential phenomenologist, so I think, philosophy as I understand it is the description of existence, so who we are, what it means to be human is, the essence of being human is existence, and so the task of philosophy is describing structures of existence and the way the world shows up and the way we are with others, but then also thinking about that in relationship to moods and feelings, emotions, but the word that Heidegger uses is moods. And one thing that is particularly kind of important at this point is the distinction he makes between fear and anxiety. So there's a lot of talk of both, understandably, at the moment, but fear is always fear of something threatening. And that's the definition you can find in all the way back to Aristotle. Fear is a fear of something that threatens, whether that could be something I'm scared of, like a giant rabbit. If I'm scared of giant rabbits, the giant rabbit appears, I feel fear. The giant rabbit disappears, I no longer feel fear. So fear is a relationship to a thing. And then Heidegger contrasts that with anxiety, which is anxiety about nothing in particular. Anxiety is the uncanniness of being in the world as such. And I think what we're feeling right now is fear, in a way that we're a fear of contagion, a fear of contamination, and of us, being contagious and contaminating other people. So that kind of dual structure of fear, but in relationship to something which is invisible and unknown. And that transforms into a kind of generalized anxiety. And what's kind of quivering beneath that anxiety in front of nothing in particular, everything and nothing in particular is mortality, is being towards death, is the fact that we are aware of ourselves in a way that we know, but most of the time we don't think about, aware of ourselves as mortal creatures, fragile creatures that can be wiped out. And mean, that's, at one level that's bad, another level that's good, because the alternative is living in the kind of counterfeit immortality of what we think of as normal life, and that is not where we are. So it's actually a quite peculiar moment, philosophically, to say the least. I mean, a moment when maybe people could be thinking, or people are thinking in, much more philosophical terms about who they are, what counts, what doesn't count, what they've been doing with their lives, what is of value, all those deep questions.
So this moment actually has kind of a philosophical heft to it, a philosophical weight. It might make people think differently about their lives and what it.
I hope so.
Do you?
I hope so.
So do you think the outcome of this pandemic will be a return to a different kind of life, or a life with a difference?
I mean, it's not going to be the same. I think there are kind of empirical questions which are really important, which could turn to in a second. But the deeper issue is that, I mean, in relation to philosophy, that philosophy is, the idea of philosophy as a kind of abstract discourse that deals with big general questions. I mean, that's fine, and that's one way of thinking about it. It's a rather kind of empty way of thinking about it. A more interesting way of thinking about it, which is really the way the activity in philosophy as an activity has been defined since its beginning, is to philosophize, is to learn how to die, as Montaigne says, quoting Cicero and Cicero's thinking of Socrates. So that philosophy begins its basic drama is a drama of the trial and execution of Socrates. And as Socrates is taking the hemlock, he's talking about his dying, immortality of the soul, and various things like that. And the way that so that philosophy is something. Philosophy is an ars moriendi, an art of dying, and it's that tradition that I think is uppermost in my mind. And it's important to remember that philosophy is something which, where, as Montaigne says, Montaigne says in the essay To Philosophize to Learn How to Die, that he's acquired the habit of having death constantly in his mouth, in the food he eats, in the drink that he imbibes. And that idea of having death in your mouth sounds strange to us, but I think we should perhaps get used to that. And also the fact that the real servitude, human servitude, is servitude to the fear of death. It's fear of death that really makes us slaves. And Montaigne also says that this line is just fantastic. He says, "He who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave." He who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. So that the idea of
extraordinary,
the idea of freedom is that a freedom is always a freedom in relationship to the necessity of one's mortality, and there's not a contradiction between those two things. There's a relation of interdependence. It's only in relationship to the certainty of your death that you can actually be free. And I think so. If things like this awful pandemic shake people up and shake people out of their their kind of more or less tranquilized activity, then that's not. I mean, it's horrible what's happening, but it might not just have horrible effects. It might shake things up. So is it going to? If things are going to change? Yes, but there are empirical questions there also that we could go into. Look, think this virus is about the shift from, a shift in imperial power structures. There's a shift taking place between
talk about
Chinese
that.
and Americans.
Yeah, talk about that, because returning to normal with a difference, meaning that people might begin to value life in another way, which means including an understanding of dying, but also a return with a difference, which might mean understanding the power structures, understanding the extraordinary inequalities, working on changing that. I mean, today there is a mass strike of so many companies, whether it's Whole Foods or other places. People are striking. And I'm wondering, has this pandemic brought into being an understanding that has always been there but hasn't been looked at, but now we're forced to?
Plagues, viruses often go together with shifts in imperial power balances, and the American empire, which is obviously a short-lived empire, and has been fading from view for the last decades. This might be the final realization that actually things are happening elsewhere, and this country is not a global leader or the center of things or head of everything, but is a rather kind of backward place that needs to organize itself. And I mean, the first thing. I mean, what was most shocking here is the nature of healthcare and the fact that there isn't a unified voice in relationship to issues of public health. That there's some kind of conflict or competition or smackdown between governors and the president and so on and so forth. It's so dispiriting and panic-inducing, and the fact that there isn't basic healthcare to cover people. This is a kind of, minimum condition of something like a decent society. It's here. It's still an aspiration. It's tremendously sad.
In your book, which came out about a year ago, and I think is out now in paperback, Tragedy, the Greeks and Us, there is this passage which I'm going to read and have you comment on. I think it's quite extraordinary. It's a passage on the devastating nature of tragedy, and we are invoking Anne Carson here. In a dialogue with Anne Carson, I made the suggestion that it might be desirable to free the experience of tragedy from the Aristotelian framework, in particular the way in which catharsis tends to dominate the discussion. To which Carson suddenly responded, "I've never understood catharsis." When I suggested that tragedy was a much more curious art form, she agreed and added simply, "more devastating." And I think this works incredibly well with this notion of returning to what passes for what is normal.
There's a view out there, which has its origins in Aristotle, but you can find it in the way every actor will talk about every movie that they're in. Usually, if they're kind of staying on message, that this movie is was a cathartic experience, and people can feel. They can identify with these characters and then feel cleansed and transformed by this cinematic experience. That's kind of what you're meant to say. And that's the kind of nice view of art and drama. Whereas I take the view that, as like Bruce Nauman said, that a work of art is like a blow to the back of the neck. It's much more like that, much more devastating. And to kind of hand sanitize it or kind of mind sanitize it with an idea of catharsis, however that's understood, purification, transformation, education, elevation. These are all severe kind of underestimations of actually what theatre and art in general does, which is much more powerful than that. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. Catharsis is a cheap a cheap trick that we've been playing on ourselves for a few thousand years, and I'd rather that we didn't. We had to face reality in a much more kind of with much more kind of realism and almost cruelty, I think, in order to see it for what it is, to see the skull beneath the skin, as Eliot said of Webster.
Yeah.
You know, that's what art enables us to do, and or good art. I mean, interesting stuff. You were talking to Werner Herzog. You know, that's I think all of Herzog's films are about that, about somebody going out into something unknown, whether it's Aguirre or Timothy Treadwell in Grizzly Man. And Timothy Treadwell believed that he was having some kind of relation of identification with the bears until they ate him, and then and human beings go out, and they go out to the, they're the uncanny ones that hold themselves out into this limit, and they are destroyed. And Herzog, for reasons that we could maybe go into, shows that over and over again. Whether it's Caspar Hauser or Aguirre or many other of his films, this is a kind of heroism, So so catharsis kind of sells things short, in my view.
And is this maybe one of the reasons that you quarrel with the notion of hope?
Yeah, I think hope is is a delusive concept. I think it's a terrible concept. And if that sounds, radical, it's not. Nietzsche's got a kind of a fairly wholesale critique of hope in the 19th century. You can find voices against hope in going all the way back to our friends the Greeks. And one story that I like is the in Aeschylus's, it might be the oldest play, it might be the second oldest play, Prometheus Bound. Aeschylus, Prometheus, when he's chained to a rock in the Caucasus, and vultures might or might not be pecking out his liver repeatedly every day. The play is him chained to a rock in the Caucasus, and then he's interrogated. He's asked, well, what did you do? What did you do to wind up here, Prometheus? Hey, Prometheus, how'd this happen? And he said, I gave human beings two gifts. Gift one, I gave them fire, and with fire they developed technology. Hooray! And for that he was punished. But the second gift I gave them was blind hope. Blind hope in order to forestall doom. Blind hope in order to forestall doom. And so I think about that hope is, I think it's a concept that blinds us. I think that's the wrong concept. We need courage, I think. Courage, determination, based on a kind of realism, the truth of the human situation, which requires courage and hopefully some calm and some steadiness to face it. But not hope. Hope, like catharsis, I think it sells things too short.
About hope, I always loved the very short, curt note on hope by Kafka, where he said, "There's hope, but not for us."
Right? Yeah. It's like it's exactly like that. Does that make Kafka, a kind of a bit of a downer? Does that make Kafka? No, on the contrary, that's what makes Kafka realistic in the absurdity of the situations that he constructs, and also profoundly funny as well.
Right.
The thing about Kafka is that Kafka is, people fell about laughing. The 6 people that were actually reading those, they read those stories too.
I remember reading that when he read the Metamorphosis to exactly those half dozen people who were around him, he just couldn't stop laughing.
It's a strain of thought, which is actually a realism about who we are and what's possible, that is not negative. It's not that because the problem ideologically, as it were, is that people are meant to be relentlessly upbeat and optimistic, and if you're not, then you're a pessimist and you're negative, and it's never that simple. Optimism and pessimism that's a fatuous distinction. We need a kind of realism, and we need a clear-eyed realism, which is capable of humor, which is not a way of ridiculing or diminishing what human beings do, but of elevating it, I think. So maybe some more Kafka would be a start, yeah.
You know, I have so many more questions to ask you. One of them would be, what are your reading patterns now? And I imagine, you know, aside from Heidegger and Montaigne, who you're quoting, I imagine Pascal would be probably on your mind at this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is he?
Yeah, he is. I think the funny thing about this whole situation, one of the funny things about it is that everybody's reading the same things. So I remember about 3-4 weeks ago, you know, before things had really got terrible, thinking, oh, you know, plague literature, Boccaccio, let's talk about the Decameron, aren't I clever? And then I think within 24 hours I heard 5 other people say the same thing. In fact, I was sitting behind someone in that Japanese restaurant, the corner, who said, oh, maybe now's the time to read Boccaccio. But that doesn't work, because Boccaccio's not that interesting. So then I was looking at other plague literature, and that wasn't working. And then I ran back to Pascal, who meant an awful lot to me when I was a student, an awful lot to me, because I've always thought of myself as kind of one-sided Pascalian, in the sense in which, you know, there's inconstancy, boredom, anxiety, and human wretchedness, but without Christ. You know, that's the bit that I've never really quite managed. But the rest of it strikes me as great, the wretchedness part. And, you know, and Pascal has this line about the human being is a reed, the weakest in nature, but a thinking reed, and a mere vapor or a droplet can wipe us away. And yet our nobility consists in that, the fact that we, you know, the universe is the universe, and a virus is a virus, and the virus knows nothing about being a virus. It's just a virus, and it's adapting, and it's kind of dumbly wandering around attacking people.
And it really doesn't care about us.
Doesn't care about us.
At
and
all.
The universe is like that too. But we have, our nobility consists in the fact that we know that we are weak, that we're creatures who can be wiped away by a vapor, a droplet. And that's our dignity consists in that. And this is this amazing thought in Pascal, which is you know, our wretchedness is our greatness. Right? It's only through an acceptance of the reality of the human condition in all of its most uncongenial aspects that we're capable of something like greatness.
Neither angel
Yeah.
nor beast, he says.
Yeah. We're something else, and it's so I find Pascal useful, and I've been actually, the only book I've been able to read is a book by my favourite British stand-up comedian. It's called Stuart Lee. And that book is called How I Escaped My Certain Fate, which is a series of routines that he gave like 20 years ago with amazing footnotes on how he thinks comedy works. I found that's held my attention.
You know,
but actually, the more interesting thing is that I talked to as the kind of, you know, the doors were closing and things were drawing in. A few weeks ago, people were saying, well, this is going to be great. I'm going to write all those papers, think about these things I'm going to do. And a friend of mine said, well, I'm going to read Kant and Hegel properly. I've not done that for 20 years. And none of them have done that because nobody can concentrate. I did this Zoom call with about 30 students last week, and just kind of checking in with them. And I said, which of you was able to read? They said, none of us can read. We can't focus. And there's something about the patterns of attention, and maybe this will change, but the last few weeks have just been this kind of fleeting distracted forms of attention. I can focus on something for 10 minutes and then suddenly I'm pulled somewhere else. There'll be a situation, somebody will think that they're sick, and so you end up talking to a friend for an hour or something like that. And I think it's more the lack of concentration, the lack of focus, and hypochondria is actually on my mind a lot as what kind of phenomenon that is, because it's a really interesting phenomenon, and the fact that we're all going through a series of hypochondriac symptoms tells us something about the relationship between the mind and the body. I think that interests me a lot.
You know, there's the line from Pascal that comes to my mind again and again and again, and I too in my younger years was tremendously taken by the pensée, but there's this very short pensée which I'm sure you know, and in closing maybe you can comment on it, where he says, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
Yeah.
Alone.
Yeah.
Which I think
we can't
connects to what you were experiencing with your students, which is, to quote T.S. Eliot now, that they are distracted from distraction by distraction.
Yep. Inconstancy, boredom, anxiety. That's that's who we are. We cannot sit quietly in a room. We think we can. We like the idea that we can. We might plan, at the end of the week, I'll just sit in my room and watch a movie and eat chocolate. But it won't happen like that. So there's something about the inconstancy of human behavior, which is, on the one hand, it's desperate in the sense in which a lot of people are just, they feel imprisoned. How are we going to get through this? And firstly, and also, why am I doing that? Why didn't I do something useful with my life? Why am I not working in an old people's home or primary care, or at least working in key food where I can, serve people food? So the sense of the futility of things, and the fact that we are unable to sit still, also reveals something I think good about us. There's quite an ideology of Californian Buddhism. This idea that, if we could just empty ourselves, empty, find the void within, accept the void. No, it's terrible. We can't do that. We can do that for about 15 minutes, and then we want to do something else. Then we become distracted, and that's not just a bad thing. That gives us the capacity to actually care, to show love, to show attention to things that we care about. I think that's also, the flip side of what's been happening in the last few weeks is the fact that so many people have been in touch with so many people that they wouldn't normally be in touch with. And the way in which all of those patterns of interaction and dependency have opened up, I think is great, right? And there's friends that are back in touch, and suddenly you find yourself speaking on the phone in a way in which you wouldn't have imagined. And we are all these weak, dependent, fragile creatures, but we're together that. And
the need for others. Okay. The need for others. Simon, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you, and I'd like to encourage all of our listeners to support the independent bookstores and order Tragedy, the Greeks and Us, which was just printed and published in paperback. It's quite an amazing book to read right now. Now that you have time, read it, because it's filled with Greek wisdom, and in many ways the Greeks knew a lot about the plague.
They did.
Simon, it's a pleasure to speak with you. We could have gone on for a long time, and indeed we will soon, when this moment too passes.
Yeah, I'll see you again soon, my friend.
You will. Thank you, Simon. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.